My own daughter wished for my death. Her words were not spoken with fleeting anger, but with calculated coldness, as if delivering a sentence. It felt like an invisible knife piercing my chest, cutting deeper than any physical wound. I, who cradled her through feverish nights, who gave my days and strength so she could have a future, heard from her own lips that my absence would be the greatest gift. The shock wasn't just the contempt, but the hidden motive behind those words. Money. The financing I provided was the bridge to her dreams, but also the trap that trapped me. If I died, everything would be easier for her. And that's where the story takes a turn. When a mother's love becomes a threat to her very survival, what's left? I imagine many have felt ingratitude bite like a hot iron into the skin. But when that ingratitude covers the face with your own blood, the wound becomes impossible to hide. The suspicious looks, the whispers at the table, the way he treated me like a nuisance. It all began to make sense. It wasn't just a lack of patience or rudeness. It was something much darker. One sentence can be forgotten, but 5 pieces of evidence cannot. 5 signs that piled up before me like stones on a crooked path, indicating that my life was worth less than the money I was providing. The weight of the discovery made me realize I was walking barefoot over broken glass inside my own home. The question that won't leave my mind is, how far will someone go to eliminate their own mother? Her silence, her averted glances, the whispered words on the phone. It all sounded like a macabre score that I still couldn't decipher. If trust is a bridge, mine was burned before my eyes. I stood alone, watching the flames, trying to decide whether to cross or let it all crumble. But in that fire there was also a revelation, something that would completely change the fate of those who tried to destroy me. And it was precisely this revelation that turned my pain into a weapon. I began to realize that cruelty doesn't always manifest itself in shouts. Sometimes it hides in small gestures, in sidelong glances, in words that seem innocent but carry venom. My daughter watched me as if I were an antique piece of furniture, useful only until the day I no longer fit in the room. That gaze haunted me. It was like sitting at the table and feeling like all the cutlery is turned against you, even when you're silent. Little by little, I began to understand that the funding I offered wasn't seen as support, but as a sort of ticket to my replacement. While I was alive, it was a nuisance. Dead, I would become a shortcut. This realization didn't come all at once. It came like a light rain that gradually soaks you until you realize you're completely wet. Every detail, every comment, was a drop in this storm that left me breathless. It's strange how the house, which should have been a shelter, begins to transform into a labyrinth. I walked the hallways and felt that each closed door hid something against me. At each meal, I realized how heavy my presence was, almost indigestible to her, as if the simple act of my existence were an affront to the future she desired. And in this atmosphere of distrust, I began to reflect. How many mothers have felt this? How many have noticed that their own children see them not as a root, but as an obstacle? That's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation. Because, in a way, this story isn't just mine. It echoes in so many other lives, in silent voices waiting to be heard. I tried to remain calm, to smile, to pretend I didn't see the shadow growing inside my own home. But deep down, her every silence was a muffled scream, her every sudden absence a veiled message. I no longer knew if the greatest threat lay outside the walls or right in front of me, in the cold gaze of the one who was supposed to protect me. And it was in this whirlwind that an unexpected piece of evidence appeared before me, almost by accident, bringing a new layer of truth that I was not prepared to face. It was then that I understood it wasn't just about lack of love or ingratitude. It was something that ran deeper, like an undercurrent about to burst the ground beneath my feet. The evidence began to accumulate in small details. Documents forgotten on the desk, messages she hadn't noticed I'd read, whispered phone conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. Each fragment was a spark, and together they formed a silent fire. There were nights when I'd lie down and feel my heart pounding, as if warning me that the danger wasn't on the street, but inside my own house. The pillow felt cold, and even with my body covered, My soul remained exposed. I'd look at the ceiling and wonder, how far will ambition go when blood is no longer enough to stop it? I also began to notice how the world around me reacted. Neighbors who averted their eyes, relatives who greeted me hurriedly, as if they already knew something I hadn't yet had the courage to say out loud. Their silence was as deafening as my daughter's sharp words. It was like walking down a street lit by dim streetlights, where every shadow could hide a threat. Between the hope that it was just paranoia and the fear that I was seeing too late, I teetered like someone walking a tightrope. There were moments when I still remembered her childish smile, the little girl who would run into my lap with scraped knees and shining eyes. But soon that reflection faded, replaced by the cold woman who now stared at me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. This duality gnawed at me from within, loving and distrusting at the same time. It was like holding a candle in the wind, trying to protect the flame, but knowing that darkness was ready to advance. And the more I tried to keep the light burning, the more I realized that what was at stake was not just my mother's heart, but the very continuity of my life. It was in this abyss of feelings that a seemingly trivial detail became the key. Something small, but capable of opening a door I feared to cross, because behind it lay the naked, undisguised truth, ready to stare me down with brutality. The key I found wasn't metal, but memory. A note forgotten inside a book, with hurried words and a name that shouldn't have been there. Reading it, I felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. It was confirmation that it wasn't my imagination. There was a bigger plan at work, and I was the disposable part. I held that paper between my fingers like someone holding evidence of a crime, knowing I couldn't show it to anyone at that moment. At that moment, the room seemed to shrink. The clock ticked cruelly, each second echoing as if mocking my weakness. I remembered the first time my daughter learned to write her own name, the same handwriting that now appeared before me, but laden with coldness and calculation. It's strange how life bends. The gesture that was once a symbol of innocence was now proof of a plot against me. There were moments when I almost wished I was wrong, that it was all just a misunderstanding, a paranoia born of loneliness. But then I remembered the way she'd look away, the way her jaw clenched when I'd enter the room, the rush to hide her phone, and hope shattered like glass on the floor. As I held that note, I thought about the weight of being a black woman aging in silence, often invisible to her own family. How many times have my opinions been dismissed as exaggeration? How many times have my silences been mistaken for weakness? Perhaps that's why this story resonates in so many hearts. And it's at this point that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message has touched them. But at the same time, I knew there was more. The note wasn't the final proof. It was just the first crack in a wall of secrets. I could almost hear the creak of the inner structures giving way, about to reveal something much greater. With each detail that emerged, the tension didn't lessen, only transformed into an uncomfortable certainty. Rock bottom hadn't been reached yet. And within me, a new question grew like a shadow. How far could this conspiracy extend without me noticing? I kept that note like someone hiding a scar under their clothes, without showing it to anyone, but feeling the burn with every movement. It burned in my pocket, even when I pretended to be casual. I wondered how many times she had watched me silently, plotting something I could never have imagined. It was like living in a house with walls that breathed secrets, where every door could open onto an abyss. And yet, there were also moments of remembrance that confused me. I remembered the scent of childhood, the nights she slept in my lap, the warmth of a pure love that seemed eternal. This contrast tore me apart. How to reconcile the girl who once embraced me with the woman who now plotted against me? A mother's heart is torn between hope and fear, between the desire to believe in the impossible and the need to see the truth that imposes itself. The images repeated themselves in my mind like overlapping photographs. I saw her as a small child, her eyes bright and asking to be held, and then I saw her as an adult, looking away coldly, as if I were just a stone in the path. Time was no longer a straight line, but a broken mirror reflecting contradictory fragments. In this emotional labyrinth, I learned to be silent. Silence became my refuge and also my weapon. It was no longer the stillness of someone who feels weak, but of someone who observes, calculates, and prepares. Like a candle lit in the wind, I balanced between the fragility of the flame and the strength of the light that insisted on remaining. There were nights when I felt the darkness itself moving around me, whispering truths I still didn't want to admit. And it was in this interplay between shadows and memories that something began to take shape before me, an even more disturbing clue, ready to tear away the veil of illusions I still clung to. The hidden note seemed to grow inside me like a breathing secret. It wasn't just a piece of paper, but a living reminder that the life I'd built was threatened by the same hands I'd once held tenderly. Sometimes I'd pull it out of the drawer just to reread those quick, almost scribbled words, and each time I did, my heart would race as if facing a sentence. And yet, amidst the fear and anger, there were glimmers of a cruel hope. I wondered if there was still a trace of the girl who ran through the yard, laughing with her mouth stained with fruit. This memory came like a sliver of light through a dusty window, illuminating for a moment what already seemed lost. But soon the darkness returned, and I once again felt like a prisoner of a game I didn't choose. The walls of the house, which had once been silent witnesses to laughter and conversation, now became accomplices in a suffocating silence. It was as if every corner held echoes of secrets I didn't have the courage to reveal aloud. Walking down the hallway at night was like crossing a tunnel between two realities. On one side, the desire to believe it was all a mistake. On the other, the certainty that danger was watching me closely. Within me, hope and fear alternated like tides. When the memory of past love surfaced, I felt the strength to resist. But when the signs of betrayal accumulated, my body felt heavy as if carrying invisible stones. This contrast tore me apart and, at the same time, kept me awake, alert, like a sentinel who knows the enemy can attack at any moment. It was in this wakeful state that I realized something even more disturbing. The note wasn't alone. There were other clues scattered throughout, small fragments that, put together, painted an even darker picture. I knew I was about to see the thing that could change everything, but I wasn't sure my heart was ready to withstand the impact. Each new detail that emerged seemed to dig deeper into the open wound. The note was no longer just isolated evidence. It functioned as the first piece of a macabre puzzle. Little by little, other fragments revealed themselves. Notes in diaries, hastily exchanged words that got out of hand, documents that appeared in places they shouldn't have. And with each discovery, the certainty settled within me like a weight impossible to ignore. It was strange to observe how these signs spread throughout everyday life. Small gestures, previously invisible, now became clear. The way her bedroom door slammed shut, the sudden silence when my name was mentioned, the conversations interrupted whenever I entered. All of this formed a network of signs that trapped me, like a spider entangled in its own web. And in the midst of this tension, I began to think about the real cost of choices. Because it wasn't just about losing trust or facing the risk of betrayal. It was about the weight of every look, the impact of every silence, the consequences that weren't limited to my life, but reverberated like waves throughout everyone around me. Even the neighbors, unknowingly, sensed something in the air, as if the charged atmosphere betrayed something no one dared to name. This contrast between what is revealed and what is hidden became my guide. I realized that, as in any power struggle, every action brought a reaction, every effort demanded a return, every test concealed a result that was not yet ready to be revealed. This realization made me more vigilant, more attentive, as if I were facing a chessboard where every move could determine the final fate. And it's impossible not to wonder, how many have felt this same silent pressure, this wrenching doubt between believing in love or seeing the truth? Perhaps you too have experienced situations where every detail seemed to carry a hidden warning. If something in this story resonates with you or sparks reflection, share what it evokes in you in the comments. Because, as painful as it was, I knew I hadn't reached my breaking point yet. Something bigger remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself with devastating force. The weight of these discoveries began to shape the way I saw every gesture, every silence around me. It was as if life had become a stage lit by shifting spotlights, where shadows danced more than the light itself. The note, the documents, the interrupted conversations. Everything added up to form a mosaic that screamed an uncomfortable truth. I was surrounded. But at the same time, there were moments when hope seeped like water through the cracks of a cracked wall. I clung to old memories, searching for a thread of humanity in them, trying to believe that, somewhere behind the coldness, the daughter I once knew still existed. This contrast gnawed at me. It was like walking between two realities. On one side, the memory of a love that had once been true. On the other, the certainty that that feeling had transformed into something dark. With each passing day, I felt the space in the house shrink. The rooms were no longer a refuge, but silent arenas where small battles took place in almost imperceptible gestures. The dish left in the sink without meeting my eyes. The door locked when it should have been open. The absence of a word where once there had been dialogue. These simple details became signs, like warning signs on a deserted road. And within this scenario, my own mind was divided. Part of me sought clarity, yearning to put all the pieces together and make sense of it. Another part, however, was lost in uncertainty, fearing that the full truth would be more painful than I could bear. It was like holding onto an old photograph that begins to fade. The more you try to preserve the image, the more you realize it slips away, leaving only fuzzy contours. This unstable balance between clarity and confusion, between progress and obstacles, kept me alert. I knew I was approaching something decisive, but it felt like walking on broken glass, each step carrying the risk of a deep cut. And it was precisely in this state of constant tension that a new piece emerged, unexpected, illuminating a path that until then had remained hidden, but which promised to reveal more than I was ready to see. The new piece I found seemed small at first glance, but it had the power to reshape the entire scene. It was a discrete detail, something that might go unnoticed by anyone, but for me it became a flash of lightning in the middle of the night. Holding it in my hands, I felt as if I were pulling back a heavy curtain and letting the truth, however partial, invade the suffocating space in which I lived. The feeling was contradictory. Part of me thrilled to finally find clarity, as if a beacon had been turned on to illuminate the darkness. But another part feared that this light would reveal more shadows than certainties. That's how discoveries work. They offer relief and, at the same time, increase the weight of responsibility. I found myself faced with a silent choice. Continue to pretend I didn't see or face, head-on, the abyss that was unfolding. The house reflected this internal conflict. The walls seemed narrower, the hallways longer, as if the physical space responded to the invisible pressure surrounding me. There were nights when the silence was so dense it woke me, as if carrying voices trapped between the bricks, whispering secrets that dared not come out. It was impossible not to feel that every shadow was watching my steps. At the same time, old memories surfaced uninvited, bringing the sweetness of a past that now mingled with the bitterness of the present. I saw myself holding her small hand, guiding her first steps, and then I faced the calculated coldness of her current gaze. This constant alternation between trust and doubt was like walking on shaky ground, where any misstep could sink me. And yet, something inside me was beginning to grow stronger. It was as if the pain itself was shaping a new version of who I was. No longer the silenced, invisible woman, relegated to the margins, but someone who was learning to observe, to wait, to combine patience and strategy. Deep down I knew the pieces were aligning to form a larger picture. But that picture was still incomplete, and the final image promised more impact than I dared imagine. The pieces finally formed an image I could no longer deny. Everything that had previously been merely suspicion now presented itself before me as a clear, harsh, and irreversible portrait. It was painful but also liberating, because the moment the truth is revealed, it can no longer be silenced. I found myself before a mirror that reflected not only my daughter's betrayal but also the strength I had rediscovered within myself. It was like walking down a dark hallway and suddenly reaching an open window. Fresh air rushed in, cutting through the suffocation that had enveloped me for so long. Every detail of my life, the cold stares, the heavy silences, the hidden notes, stopped being a burden and became part of a learning experience. Pain became fuel and fear became strategy. I realized I wasn't just the victim of a cruel plot. I was the narrator, and my voice had the power to rewrite the ending. This turning point didn't come with screams or explosions, but with the quiet steadfastness of someone finding ground where before there had only been falling. The contrast was evident. Where before I walked hesitantly, now my steps had direction. Where before there was shadow, now I found glimmers of light. This blend of reflection and action showed me that, even in the deepest losses, there is always room for an intimate triumph, invisible to the eyes of those who seek to destroy us. And perhaps that's why being here, following each revelation, is so memorable. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal, but about the ability to be reborn amidst chaos. If at any point you felt this truth strike your heart, if something along this path resonated within you, leave your silent gesture of support. Like, comment, and subscribe, not out of obligation, but because being part of this journey also transforms your own. As I close my eyes now, I feel as if I've crossed a bridge. Behind me lie the shadows and secrets. Before me, a space opens up where pain no longer dictates the rules. And in that place, victory is not just survival, but living with the certainty that kindness can be wounded, but never destroyed.